Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf kaf aleph. I will just mention that the shiurim for Shavuot are already up on the site. So right after this class you can get to them. They're kind of short, so that makes it a little bit easier. And if you have time while you're preparing for Chag, if you haven't yet listened to Gefet of this week, it's very, very interesting comparison between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva's approaches. Again, it's from a few days ago, but I just wanted to re-mention it because it's a very interesting class about the difference of approaches to basar ta'ava, right? We're in Chullin all about eating meat and, not brought for sacrifices, even though today we're going to talk a lot about sacrifices also, but an interesting debate about what was permitted in the desert, what was permitted when they got into the land, why the differences, right? It really begs the question, right? What exactly is going on there? And there's an article by Shuli Mishkan in Flashback about relating to today's daf of Eli. We're going to learn very, very briefly, but if you want to go more in depth about it, about Eli the kohen in the time of Shmuel. And the last announcement before we get started is that the Sukkah Challenge is starting. So Mazal Tov to those who finish Makot. If you haven't yet finished, it's okay. The idea of these challenges is to kind of find your own pace and learn a Masechet at your own time. Right? It's a great way to get people either, I know a lot of people doing Daf Yomi have been doing them and it's good review for them. And for new learners, it's a great way to get them to get into the learning. Right? Chullin isn't always the easiest place to start. So we're doing challenges throughout. We'll be doing them leading up to the Siyum Hashas next year. Each time we're going to pick a new Masechet. This time it's Sukkah, which the reason we chose it is because it'll basically cover us through the summer and get people to Chag Sukkot with having a Masechet Sukkah under their belt, which is a great way to kind of go into the Chagim. So the announcements went out, and if you want to share them around and encourage others to begin learning, feel free to share them wherever you can. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. So we ended yesterday with a big, really basic question based on what Zeiri said. If we take Zeiri seriously, right, and Zeiri, by the way, was a first-generation Amora, and we say that we're going to nishbira mafreket, if the bone of the neck is broken, with rov basarimo, and with the majority of the flesh that's around it is cut as well, then the animal is proclaimed dead. Now, this is in a regular case of an animal or a bird. It's proclaimed dead immediately. What's the relevance? The relevance is it neveila? Does it have the impurity of a neveila? Now, we're going to talk about this in a bunch of different areas. We'll talk about humans. We'll talk about creatures like shratzim. The idea here is going to be that we're talking about a case where the body is still moving, okay? There's convulsions going on in the body, but even if the body's convulsing and it still seems like the person is alive, what we're really determining here is what kind of actions determine death, okay? We're not talking about the big debate, brain death, heart death and all that. That's not the issue here. They're not talking about that, but although it is kind of connected, but it's what we're going to see certain things like breaking of bones. That's why it's different than brain death or heart death or, that. But it's going to be some sort of indicator that if this happens, the person, the animal, whatever it is going to be considered completely dead. So first we're talking about animals and we're talking about the neveila and an animal or a bird becoming considered dead once you break that neck bone and perhaps also the spinal column and the flesh around it, the majority of the flesh around it. So Rava comes and says, then how on earth do we do melika, right? Assuming we don't take the approach of Bnei Rabbi Chia, and according to the approach that the only way to do it is, remember we saw different opinions, is to move the simanim to the back and do them first. But the standard way of doing melika, not according to them or possibly according to them, depending on whether they meant even that way or specifically that way, is that you first break the bone in the back of the neck. So then it doesn't make any sense. When you cut the simanim, you're cutting simanim of a dead bird. That can't be an action of melika. Melika is supposed to be like shchita, which takes the life out of the bird. So it makes no sense. So we talked yesterday about, this issue of how it's similar to Havdalah. Okay, we're going to come back to this issue of Havdalah in the bird's burnt offering a little bit later. So anyway, in other words, what happened was Rava asked his question, then how do we do melika? Abaye asked a counter question. What about the two simanim and the olat ha'of, which we're going to spend a lot of time on the next two, both this daf and the next. So if you didn't get that whole thing, don't worry, we're going to work on it today. But anyway, we start our daf with the words Mikom Makom Kasha. But we're back to Rava's question. As Rava kind of dealt with the difficulty that Abaye asked about him, resolved that. And now we're back to saying, okay, well, how is melika done? I'm a Rava. Now Rava answers his own question. Ema b'cheinu oseh. Say it like this. This is how you do melika. Chotech shidra umafreket below rov basar. You cut the spinal column and the bone in the back of the neck without the majority of the flesh around it. You make sure that the majority of the flesh is still there. Remember, we talked about that melika is this complicated act of the kohen to do, both in terms of managing to hold the bird in place, all with one hand, or possibly all in one hand, using his arm, and using his fingernail to do the shechita. Now he has to use his fingernail to do the shechita in a very, very the melika in a very, very specific way. Make sure to break the back of the neck, break the spinal column, but don't cut most of the flesh with it. Then you get to the simanim, and then you cut the simanim. Okay, so that's what he says, and that's how we do melika, and that resolves the problem. Now, not only did he answer the question in this way, but also we're going to have another story where Rabbi Zeiri, Kisalik Rabbi Zeiri, where Rabbi Zeiri made aliyah to Israel, and now we're going to see the parallel sugya in Israel. Rabbi Ami, he sees Rabbi Ami, who's teaching exactly, okay, this is like third generation of Moraim. Okay, they're teaching, Rabbi Ami's teaching where Zeiri said. Okay, don't get confused between Rabbi Zeiri and Zeiri. Okay, Zeiri was the one who made the comment, and this halacha that created this problem. So Rabbi Zeiri says, Rabbi Zeiri asked the same question Rava asked. Okay, which is, when it's dead, you're going to do melika. There's no such thing doing melika on a dead bird. Esh domem kasha chada. Rabbi Ami was silent for a whole hour or something like that, right? Shah doesn't necessarily mean exactly an hour, but he was speechless, as we say. He didn't know what to answer. He said, wow, that's a really good question. Amar le, but after the Shah Chada passed, however much time that was, he came up with an answer. And it's going to be the exact same answer that Rava gave. And he says the same thing. It must be that you break the shidra and the mafreket. You break those bones without the majority of the flesh, and that doesn't create a situation where the bird is already dead. And to further prove this, they bring a braita. Tanya namihachi, there's a braita to support this, which actually describes the process of melika, and now you're going to see it inside the braita exactly there. Ketzad mokim chatara of. How do you do melika on a chatara of? This is the sin offering of the bird. We're going to differentiate. Now we're going to go back to what I talked about yesterday at the end of the daf, about the burnt offering of a bird and a sin offering of a bird, okay? If you bring a sin offering with a bird or a burnt offering with a bird, the halachot are different. So we're going to start with the sin offering. Chotech shidra mafreket below rov basar. Okay, that's it. That's all we needed in this braita. Okay, we're going to continue on. But there you have it. You break the shidra and the mafreket without the majority of the flesh. Okay, there's your answer. There's the braita that supports both Rava and Rabbi Ami in their answers to the question. But anyway, we're going to read the braita, and then we're going to get off a little bit on something. So, without rov basal, ad shemigia laveshet o lakaneh. In other words, until you get to the two simanim, right, the windpipe and the gullet. And what we need to do, right, the point is you can't get there, right, again, you can the way B'nai Rabbi Chia said, which is move the simanim to the back, but assuming you don't do that, then you break through so that you can get to the two simanim. That's obviously why we have to break those bones, because they're in your way. Higia laveshet o lakaneh, chotech siman echad o rubo v'rov basar imo. Now, this is just the way you do shechita, the way you do melika for the sin offering of the bird. Birds in general, when it comes to shechita, we talked about this, you only need to cut one siman to do shechita, as opposed to animals where you need two. Now, both for the birds and for the animals, you don't need the whole siman. You need the majority of it. So you have the majority of one siman, okay, or one siman, okay, it says one siman or the majority of it, with the majority of the flesh around it. Okay, that also has to be included in what you tore, and you're done. Uba ola, but in olat ha'of, and that's because of what we talked about yesterday, which we didn't get into enough, but there's a halacha of lahavdil, to completely sever the head from the body, or I should say to sever the head from the body. Okay, completely is a debate, whether it has to be completely severed or mostly severed. We're going to make reference to that debate in a minute. Be'ola, well, the one difference between the ola and the chatat is not about breaking the neck bone. Of course, you have to break the neck bone. But be'ola, after you break the neck bone and the spinal column, you get to the simanim, and instead of one siman, be'ola shnaim o rov shnaim. You have to do two or the majority of two. So now the Gemara says, for some reason it doesn't bother them, the language in the chatat, where it says one or the majority of one. But in the ola, they say, this is very confusing. Two or the majority of two. Why is it confusing? Well, because, and maybe that's why it didn't bother them in chatat, but in olat there's a big debate between the rabbis and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, about whether you need to completely sever the head, meaning completely cut both simanim, or partially, okay, the meaning rov. Okay, so Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says you only need rov. You only need the majority of the two simanim. You don't have this halacha of lavdil completely. You don't have to completely separate the head from the body, and therefore you don't need to completely cut the two simanim. You just do it like you do in an animal, it's rov of two. Here it's rov of two. So, mane, who does this line go according to, this braita? Because the braita says, Rabbanan, if it's the rabbis, ha'amr shnayim dafka. Rabbis say it has to be two complete simanim. And here it says two or the majority of two. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, ha'amar rov shnayim. If it's Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, he says you only need the majority of the two. So why would he say two or the majority of two? Just say the majority of two. That's enough. You don't need to say two complete ones. So the Gemara asks, who does this braita go according to? Now, I just want to remind you, we brought the braita not for this line at all. We brought the braita because we wanted to know that we wanted to prove what Zeiri and Rava had said about the rov, right? About breaking the mafreket without the rov basal. Okay? That's a different issue. Now they're just focusing on the end of that braita and saying this doesn't seem to match either the rabbis or Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara is going to give two answers here. Ema, shnaim l'Rabbanan, rov shnaim l'Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. The braita is trying to be neutral and saying it's either in the olat ha'of you do two or the majority of two, meaning two if you hold by the rabbis, the majority of two if you hold by Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. And that's one way to read the braita. And the second way is Ibait Ema Ha v'ha Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Maybe the whole thing is according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Now, if he only needs rov, why does he say shnayim? Because what he wants to say is this: My shnayim shedomim l'shnayim. Meaning, okay, now when you do majority, you could do 51%, right, or 50.1, okay? But you could also do 90%. So when it says shnayim or rov shnayim, what it means is, even according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, better to do it that it looks like it's completely severed, meaning you do the majority, 90% or something. But and that's the shnayim. Shnayim is, it looks like shnayim. Or you could do rov shnayim, you could really, it's not ideal, but you could do 50.1%, and that would be fine too. And that's why it says both languages. So we explain the braita in two ways. What's interesting about the Gemara is that they mention this machloket, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis, which seems like a very basic machloket, but we haven't seen it inside yet. But have no fear, later in today's daf, they're going to finally say, okay, what's this opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis? And then we're going to get into it. But it's a very long braita, and we're not going to even really fully understand where Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon gets it until the next daf. Okay, but that's going to be the last part of today's shir. But since we were talking about this mafreket and breaking the neck bone in an animal or in a bird, and saying the statement of Zeiri that once you break the neck bone and most of the flesh with it is cut off, the animal is pronounced dead on the spot, already has tumah of a neveila, so anyone who touches it, right, is now impure. Well, now we're going to move to humans, okay? And if this happened to a human, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Nishbara mafreket v'rov basar ima mitameh ba'ohel. Now, they want to determine moment of death, not because we want to know is the person alive or dead for whatever reason, but they want to know because of impurity, just like tumat neveila. Well, a carcass is basically, or a corpse, I should say, the carcass would be the animal. The corpse is mitame in an ohel. That means if it's in a covered space, anything in that covered space becomes impure. So as soon as, let's say, the mafreket gets broken, the body's still convulsing, and then you carry the body outside, and by that point, the body stops convulsing. Well, it doesn't matter that you moved it outside, because at that point, it was already pronounced dead for the purposes, at least, of impurity, okay? Probably in general, but it's already dead at that point, and it's metame ba'ohel. V'im tomar o toma aseh de Eli. Now, I did mention we're going to talk about Eli, a kohen, today. What about the maseh of Eli? Mafreket, so what are they going to say? There, you're going to see in a minute in the pasuk, his mafreket was broken. It doesn't say rov basari mo. Okay, no, but the pasuk need to mention this. That's a good question. But it says he broke his mafreket, his backbone. We'll see it in a second and what exactly happened. Mafreket below rov basar having. Now that was mafreket below rov basar. And it says there he was dead. So they answer zikna shani. He was old. And therefore, it's different. When you're old and something happens to your body, it could cause death immediately. Whereas if you're younger, that won't necessarily cause you to die, and you can't use Eli as a question. Okay, now we're going to see the pasuk. They're really bringing the pasuk just to prove to you. They assume you know the pasuk and you know that the mafreka was broken and he died. But what they want to show you here is it was because he was old. It even says so in the pasuk. So now we're going to see what happens to him and why his neck bone broke. Dichtiv. Vayihi kazkiro et Aron Elohim, when he heard about the Aron Elohim that he was taken captive. Vayipol me'ala kiseh choranit, he fell backward on his chair. Ba'ad yarashal, right by the gate. Vatishaver mafrakto vayamot. Okay, so his mafreket breaks and he dies. And now the point being, they brought this pasuk because of the next words. Ki zaken ha'ish v'chaved v'chulei. Okay, he was old. Because he was old, that's why the mafreket caused him to die. Normally, the mafreket alone is not enough. You need mafreket and rov basar imo. Okay, again, you could answer the question. Maybe they just didn't tell you, right? It's not like it was necessary. It's not like they were trying to tell you, what are the rules of when a person dies, and they should have mentioned the majority of the flesh. But that's the way the Gemara views it. Okay. Now, Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. We're going to have Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to have other ways that rabbis talk about this act will mean immediate death, even if the body's still convulsing. Kira'o kidag mitame ba'ohel. If you cut a person like a fish straight down the middle, then, right, from top to bottom, cut in the middle, like you cut fish, then it will have impurity like in a tent. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak umigabo. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak says that's only true if you do it in the back. If you do it on the front part of a person and they're still convulsing, we view them as still alive. If you do it in their back, and they're convulsing, then we view the person as dead. Okay, now we're going to move back to animals. Amar Shmuel, okay, I'm telling you this because it doesn't say it inside, but it's clear from the context and the continuation that we're moving to animals, and then we're going to move to shrotzim, which are the creepy creatures. Asa'ad gistera neveila. If you cut the animal in half, meaning this time, how would you say it? I guess widthwise, where basically you're going to cut the person where you're going to have the animal, top half of the body versus bottom half of the body. So either you cut it in the neck or you cut it down the middle, by the stomach, and you make a slice across the width of the body, then it's neveila. Amar, right, so that's why we know we're talking about an animal, because that's tuma neveila. It's already dead again, even if it's convulsing. Amar Rabbi Elazar, nital hayarech v'chalal shela, neveila. Yes, there's a debate whether the word nikar, chalal shela, nikar. Okay, there's two ways to read this, but if an animal's calf was taken, the calf of the thigh of the animal was taken out with its halal, where so now it's it depends how you go, but the girsa, some is halal shela nikar, its absence is noted, like you can see that it's missing a leg. Okay, now you would think, isn't it always obvious that you can see that the leg is missing, right? It's pretty obvious, so what they're going to say is like this. Okay, in a minute we'll see, but neveila, it's a neveila. Okay, if it's missing one complete leg and the space, okay, some people think it's not that it's noticeable, and the space, like where it connects. So it's not really clear what this means, where the Gemara asks, hechidami halal shela, or hechidami halal shela nikar. How do you know that the halal is taken out, or how do you know that its absence is missing? What would determine that? Amar Rava, kosher revutza v'nir'et chasera. If the animal is lying down, and you can tell that the leg is missing, right? Obviously, if it's standing up, you can tell the leg is missing. We would actually probably have trouble standing up without a leg, but the point being, if it's crouched on the ground and you can notice that the leg is missing, then that's considered that the animal is dead. Tnanatam. Now we're going to bring a Mishnah in ohalot, which is all about tuma, impurity, and we're going to talk about the impurity of shratzim. And when a sheretz is determined to be dead. A sheretz is, there's 8 creeping creatures, or creeping creatures they call them, that are considered to be impure, but only when they're dead, not when they're alive. So they carry impurity, right? If they touch a person, the person becomes impure. So what determines moment of death for them? Hutzu rashehen, if their heads are cut off, afal pisha mefarkasin, even if they're still convulsing, tmeim, they carry impurity, kizanav halita'ah shemefarkeset, and they give you an example that you probably know about. If you cut a lizard's tail, the tail will keep moving. Now, obviously, you can't say when the tail is detached that the tail still has the life of the animal in it, but it still convulses, and that's proof, or it's just a way of identifying with this concept. And I assume they're talking about it in the creeping creatures because olata is it's one of those. So just like you can see, the tail will still keep moving, even though it's dead, it's cut off. So likewise, if you cut the head off one of these shratzim, then it's considered dead and it carries impurity. My hutzu, what does it mean cut off? And now we're going to end up somehow coming back to this machloket Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis about the olat ha'of, even though it doesn't seem connected. Okay, and the issue of havdalah, okay, which is lahavdil, to separate the head from the body of the olat ha'of, which again is a unique halacha by the bird burnt offering. It's not true for the sin offering. Remember, the sin offering we learned already, you only cut one siman, which means obviously not cut off. Soon we'll see it all in the psukim, and then we'll see it in the braita, and we'll figure it all out. We're getting close, but we have one more sugya to finish, which is going to lead us to there. So Rish Lakish says, Hutzu mamash. Rish Lakish says, what does it mean, Hutzu? It means completely severed. The head is completely cut off, then it's considered dead. It's not pronounced dead if it's still somewhat attached. Rabbi Ami, Amar Rabbi Ami, kehavdalat al olat ha'of. Rabbi Ami says, in the name of Rabbi Ami, just like in the olat ha'of, the burnt offering. Now there's going to be 2 ways to read this line of his. Amarle Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Asi. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Asi, when you quoted Rabbi Mani saying, Kavdalat olat ha'of, did you mean Kavdalat olat ha'of l'rabanan? Did you mean like the rabbis say, where you completely sever it? V'lo pagitu, and you weren't, and he wasn't, this quote you brought of Rabbi Mani, he wasn't arguing with Rish Lakish. He was just bringing an example. He was saying, you said cut off completely, and I'm telling you, just like the olat ha'of, where it's severed completely, like the rabbis hold. O Dilma kavdalat olat ha'of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Or did you mean like the olat ha'of, the way Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, where he doesn't think it needs to be severed completely? And then upagitu, and then you're disagreeing with Rish Lakish, because then you're saying that it doesn't need to be severed completely to be considered dead in the sheretz. Now again, this has nothing to do with the olat ha'of. It was just brought as an example. The problem is that phrase, which obviously when he said it, he thought everyone was going to know what I mean, is open to interpretation, because there's 2 opinions about the havdalat olat ha'of, which is Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, who says only the majority of the simanim needs to be cut. It doesn't need to be completely severed. And the rabbi said it needs to be completely severed. So does he mean, again, Rish Lakish said completely severed. So is he supporting him and just giving an example? Oh, just like the olat ha'of, like the rabbis. Or is he saying, no, I don't think it needs to be completely severed for the sheretz to be dead. Just like in the olat ha'of, you don't need to completely sever the 2 simanim. Here, again, it's a completely different topic, because there we're talking about the simanim, and here we're just talking about the head of the sheretz being cut off. But, similar, because they're both the head. But one's a sheretz, one's a bird, it's different. Anyway, that's the different 2 different ways of understanding what he said. So he was approached, Rabbi Asi, after he said this. Are you disagreeing with Rish Lakish, or are you agreeing? I just want to point out one thing just to bring us back to the end of yesterday's daf. Even the rabbis who say it's completely severed, if you remember, we said it's completely severed as regards the simanim, because that's like in the animal. But the hide is still attached at that point. Okay, that's just a side point. It's not so important for our purposes, but I just wanted to remind you of that because we finished the daf with that. Even the rabbis who think it's completely severed think the simanim are completely severed. So the head is completely severed from the neck, but they're still attached by the skin. Okay, the skin of the bird is still connected. Okay. Not that has so much significance for us right now, but I just wanted to connect it so you remembered the end of yesterday's daf. So now, what does he answer? He answers, Amar le kavdalat olat ha'of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon upaginan. What I really meant was the separating of the head according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and I was trying to say that Rabbi Mani, because he was quoting Rabbi Mani, remember Rabbi Asi quoted Rabbi Mani, disagrees with Rish Lakish. And then we end up with a machloket. Now we're going to have the same sugya, much shorter, and same conclusion, but the way it happened was not that Rabbi Asi said something that wasn't so clear, and then they asked him, and then he answered, but he said it straight from the beginning. Ika de Amre, some people say, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Hutzu Mamash. Again, they're both trying to explain the words in the Mishnah, Hutzu Vashehem, even though they're Mefarkasim Tme'im, right? If you cut the head of the chariots, even if it's still convulsing, it's impure already, immediately. And Rabbi Shimon says, only if Hutzu Mamash, completely severed. Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Mani, Kavdalat Olat Ofla, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Berov Shnayim. And then he says it much more clear, right? Because it wasn't so smart that he was very unclear the way he said at the beginning, and it was leading to two opposite conclusions. But here he says it very explicitly in this version, like the separation of the burnt offering of the bird, according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, where it doesn't need to be severed completely, just the majority of two simanim, and that's what we mean by the sheretz. If the majority of the head is cut off and the two simanim are majority cut off, that's already considered moment of death. So he puts moment of death in an earlier moment for the sheretz. Okay, finally, we get to what we're looking for. Although, as I told you, we're not going to completely get to it today. But my Rabbanan, my Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Okay, we're still on Amud Aleph, although you'll see that Amud Bet is very short. But even though we still have a long braita to get through, till we really finally figure out where Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon gets it. Okay, we're going to get the rabbi's position today, and we're going to actually see a different opinion which doesn't even relate to that issue. So to understand this before, I want to start with the psukim. Okay, so if we look at the psukim about the olat ha'of and the chatat ha'of, okay, they're two separate sections, right? The ola comes up in Parak Aleph of Vayikra, where it talks about if you want to bring an animal, and then it gets to if you want to bring a bird. Okay, so if you want to bring a bird, in Mina of Ola Korban Ola Hashem, I mean chapter 1, pasuk 14 of Vayikra. V'ikriv mina torim umin b'nei hayonah. Okay, we're going to get to those on Daf Kaf Gimel and Shabbos' Daf. These torim b'nei hayonah and what the ages are. So you bring from those two options of birds. V'ikrivo. Okay, that's not important today. V'ikrivo hakohen ala mizbeach. This word ikrivo is very important. Hikrivo means, and he brings it, sacrifices it, or really means brings it closer to the mizbeach. Okay. But the word hikrivo, it could have just said v'ikriv, and he brings. And you would know, obviously, he brings the bird. But because it says hikrivo, it's trying to tell you this is done in a way different from what? The chatat ha'of. Okay? Okay, so what he's saying is, this is brought differently from something else. Now, we haven't read the something else yet, so we don't know yet, so hold off on that. So, hikrivo kohen ala mizbeach. The kohen brings specifically this to the altar. Umalaket rosho, he does melika on its head. V'iktir mizbeach, and then he burns it on the mizbeach. Then nimtzad damo kir mizbeach, he squeezes out the blood onto the wall, etc. Okay. Then we move to Vayikra chapter 5. In Vayikra chapter 5, you might remember, it's the korban ola v'yoreh, the sliding scale offering. And it says you're supposed to bring an animal, but im lo tagia yado deseh, if you can't afford the seh, heviet hashamo asher chata. So you bring your korban, shtei torim or shnei b'nei yonah, two birds, right? Either the torim or the b'nei yonah. Again, we're not going to talk about this right now. Echad l'chatat ve'echad. Okay, you bring it la'Hashem, to God. Echad l'chatat ve'echad lo'olah. So one is a sin offering, one is a burnt offering. So in this we're going to relate to the sin offering, and then we're going to talk about the burnt offering. So I'm in Vayikra chapter 5, we're now at verse 8. Ve'yaviotam ala kohen, ve'ikriv et asher lachatat rishona. So you bring the chatat first. What do you do with it? Malaket rosho mimul or po. So the first thing you get is you do melika by where? In the back of the neck. We had the whole discussion about that. Now, notice in the ola, it just said malaket rosho. It didn't say mimul or po. It didn't say where. And then it says something else that wasn't mentioned in the ola, which is vilo yavdil. And you don't separate. Now, if you don't separate, what does that mean? You don't separate the head from the body, which means if you don't have to separate it, that's why we learn, then you do the melika just like you do the shechita in the sense that it's only one siman, because there's no halacha to separate it. Okay, now you can try to see where they get. Now, it never says in the ola that you have to separate it, okay? It just says hikrivo. Now, hikrivo means this stands different from the chatat. In what way is it different? Well, they assume it's different because In the chatat, it says lo yavdil, and therefore here you're going to have to be mavdil. That's going to be one of the ways to get to the fact that there's havdalah. It's very important because when you talk about the olat and the chatat and the differences between them, one of the main differences is this: you have to be mavdil in the olat ha'of, and you don't have to in the chatat, right? Whether you say all the way or part of the way. But it really never says it explicitly in the psukim, and that's really important to understand. It never says yavdil. Okay, we talked about this way back, I assume it was in Zvachim. Okay, so then we go on, and then it tells you what to do with the dam chatat and how you do the blood, which also there's differences between the chatat and the olah, but not for today. And then in Pasuk Yud it says ve'et hasheni. So now take the second one. Remember, one is a chatat, a sin offering, and one is a burnt offering. The second one, yaseh olah kamishpat, just like the previous. Okay, that's going to lead to a whole huge question. What's the previous? Now, the obvious is the previous is it's done like the chatat. Okay, what's the problem? We already said hikrivo is to tell you it's not done like the chatat, right? So on the one hand, it says it's done like the chatat. On the other hand, we also learned it's not like the chatat. So that's number one problem. And the other possibility is that maybe we're talking about the chatat of an animal. Now you say, what does this have to do with the chatat of an animal? Why would the olah be like a chatat of an animal? Because this korban olah, if you remember, because it's a sliding scale offering, it's coming in place of an animal sin offering. And as you're supposed to ideally bring the animal sin offering. But in lo tagia yado deiseh, if you can't afford the animal sin offering, then bring two birds. One goes as a sin offering, one is a burnt offering. And then we say the burnt offering is done like the animal sin offering, not like the bird sin offering, because we already have that pasuk in the bird's burnt offering, hikrivo, which says it's different from the sin offering. So that's where we're going to start having different opinions here. Okay, you can look at the chart and see, and then we're going to see the whole thing inside, which is the chachamim, and each one's going to explain this word kamishpat. It's like something in a different way. Chachamim are going to say it's like an animal sin offering. Rabbi Yishmael, who we haven't heard of yet, but Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon are going to say it's like a bird burnt offering. Okay, a bird sin offering. And then each one is going to say, though, in a different way. Okay, and that's why Rabbi Yishmael is going to have nothing to do with our topic, but he is darshaning this word kamishpat in the same way as Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, but also differently. Okay, let's get started. That was all the intro. My Rabbananu, my Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. So where do we see their opinions? Titanya, as it says in a braita. Now this will be easy because I already set up all the background. And the second bird you do as an olah, like something. So the rabbi's position is, the first position is, like the chatat of an animal. Okay? A sin offering of an animal. So now the Gemara wants to know, why would you go from a burnt offering of a bird to a sin offering of an animal? Why don't you go burnt offering of a bird is like the burnt offering of a bird, right? A sin offering of a bird. That would be burnt offering bird, sin offering bird. That would make more sense. So now he's going to explain why, which I already told you. Because in the section about the olah, in the first chapter of Vayikra, it says, this one is done in this way. Because there it already said the chatat of is not done like the olat of. So you can't say they're not done the same and they are done the same. It doesn't make any sense to say that. So what's left to say then kamishpat? Kamishpat chatat beima. Okay, so that's the first part, which is just to say, what is the word mishpat coming to say? It's like the chatat of an animal. So now the obvious question is, well, in what way is it like the chatat of an animal? Ma chatat be'ema ein ba, turning out amubet, ela min Chullin, ubiyom, ubiyado yamanit. We're going to say there's 3 halachot we're going to learn that are similar between the animal sin offering and the burnt bird offering. So what is it? Number 1, the animal sin offering can't come from Maser Sheni money. Okay, remember you take your Maser Sheni, you redeem it onto a coin, you bring the coin to Jerusalem, you can buy sacrifices with it, you can buy other things, but you can't buy obligatory sacrifices like a sin offering, okay, an animal sin offering. So just like you can't use your Maser Sheni money for this, it could only come from Chullin. Likewise, this olah, because it's an obligatory olah, is like the chatat be'ema, and that you can't buy it from Maser Sheni money. Ubayom, you have to do it during the day. And Piado Yemani, you have to do, the kohen has to do all the avodot with his right hand. So just like in the chatat behema, you have to do that. Af olat ha'of ein haba ela min hachulin ubiyom ubiyado hayemanit. Okay, so then we're going to say it also has all those criteria. Now, ima lahalan birov shnayim avkan birov shnayim. Wait a minute. If you're going to say, the rabbis are going to say, well, we're comparing it to the chatat behema in these ways, but then why don't we compare it in another way, which would be just like the chatat of an animal. What do? How many simanim do you have to cut? Rov shnayim, majority of 2. Not completely sever the head, right? They could still be attached. Avkan berov shnayim. Maybe here also you would say berov shnayim. Okay, going down in the chart here to the next section, right? We have a question on this comparison. If we're going to compare it all the way and say rov shnayim and not completely severed. So now we're going to finally see where the rabbis get it that you have to completely sever it. Talmud Lamal umalak vihiktir. Okay, because it says umalak vihiktir. Okay, this is not what we said before. It's not because of hikrivo. It's different from the chatat, and the chatat is velo yavdil. We're going to get to that later. But he learned it from the words malak et rosho vihiktir. Now melika happens, and it's juxtaposed in the pasuk to the word hiktir. Melika is the slaughtering of it, right? This type of slaughtering you do in the midbar, in the mishkan or in the temple. And hiktir is to burn it on the altar. Now, when you burn an olah, you always burn the parts separately. So they're going to say like this: Ma haktara harosh batzmo va'aguf batzmo, af melika harosh batzmo va'aguf batzmo. Just like when you burn it on the altar, it has to be completely separated, the parts. So since the melika appears just before the burning, we're going to say that the 2 are done in the same manner, which is the melika completely severs the head from the body. And now we've gotten the rabbi's position. Okay, it's all because kamishpat is learned from the chatat of the animal, but not completely. We learned 3 things, although we're going to question some of those in the next daf. But then we're going to say, but it's not like it for the simanim because of malak v'iktir. Okay, now Rabbi Yishmael omer kamishpat kimishpat chatat ha'of. Okay, kamishpat he's now going to say it's not comparing to the chatat of the animal; it's comparing to a sin offering of a bird, which was a little more intuitive. Reading right from the context of the psukim, right? Because it said, do the chatat this way of the bird, right? The one that you have used for a sin offering, do this way. And the second one, do like that one. Okay? Now, in what way are we comparing them according to Rabbi Yishmael? Ma chatat ha'of mul ha'oref, af olat ha'of mimul oref. Remember what I said before? It says, malak et rosho mimul orpo, right? It tells you where to do the melika on the back of the neck, right? Opposite the nape of the neck. And in the olah, it didn't tell you where. It just said, do melika on the head. You might have thought maybe you could do melika from the front. So because it says, do the second one like the first one, it's telling you, slaughter it in the same manner in what way in the same manner? He doesn't talk at all about havdalah here, which is why his opinion wasn't mentioned before. We didn't mention Rabbi Yishmael because all he says is the comparison is specifically for where on the back of that neck that you do it. So now they say, Ima lahalan molek ve'ino mavdil b'siman echad, avkam molek ve'ino mavdil b'siman echad. But wait a minute. If you're going to compare it to the chatat you only do, right, you're comparing the melika. You only do 1 siman in the chatat. So maybe in the olah you're only going to do 1 siman as well. And you don't need to separate the head in any way, right? He doesn't really get to, is it completely severed or not completely severed? Talmud Lamal, vihikrivo. So vihikrivo, and this is what I told you before, okay? It's different from the rabbis who learned, how do we know you have to sever the head from malak et rosho v'iktir? And from there he learned they have to be completely severed. Just the concept that you need to be mavdil, which again, if you're going to say havdalah, it could mean one of 2 things. It definitely means that you have to cut 2 simanim. It just might not mean that you have to cut them completely. So if you learn it from malak v'iktir, then you're going to get to, it has to be completely severed, because it has to be like when you burn it, they're completely separated. So also melika is completely separated. But if you learn it from hikrivo, which basically just teaches you the olah is different from the chatat, it means that when the chatat has no requirement to separate, meaning only 1 siman, in the burnt offering, you have to do 2 simanim. Now, whether it's complete or not complete, that, right, Rabbi Yishmael doesn't address that. Okay, we're just going to start Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, even though I know you're dying to hear what he says, but anyone who wants to can go immediately after the shir and listen to tomorrow's shir, because it's already up. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, kamishpat chatat ha'of. So he basically agrees with Rabbi Ishmael that it's kamishpat chatat ha'of. But if you look at the chart, you can see that he doesn't agree with what's the purpose of comparison. Okay? And that you're going to get to tomorrow, because even if I read you the next line, which goes into already the next daf, the next line makes no sense, and the Gemara is going to have to say, what are you talking about? So that's all for tomorrow. So here's your chart. The chart's going to continue. So if you're going to learn over Chag, you can print it out before Chag and have it. The chart will help you, and the psukim as well, to understand the rest of the next page. Because the next page, we're going to finish this braita, and then we're going to go and analyze different elements of the braita. Okay, so with that, we're going to do a summary of today's daf, which is, we started with the question about melika. How can you do melika if you break the the neck bone with the rov of basar? It's already considered dead. Well, then how on earth do you do melika on a dead bird? So we figured out that, okay, it's breaking the bone, but you have to make sure not to cut most of the flesh around it. Okay. Then we saw that not only did Rava say this, also Rabbi Zeiri got the answer from Rabbi Ami about this, because he also asked the question. And we saw a braita that supported. The braita that supported made this reference to Rabbi Elazar, right, about the havdalah, the separating, or talked about two simanim, or the majority of two simanim, which basically made reference to this machloket that we got to at the end of the daf between Chachamim and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the Gemara tried to figure out who does the braita go according to in that line, even though that line had nothing to do with what we were talking about. Then, because remember, we brought the braita to say the beginning part of melika, that how you get to the two simanim, not the part of cutting the two simanim, which was more about the rov shnayim and the difference between the chatan and the olat. Then we talked about both in animals, in humans, and in birds, in creeping creatures, what the moment of death is. That even if it's still convulsing, what determines moment of death for purposes really of impurity. Then, within the discussion about the sheretz, we have this machloket about, we had this opinion that basically said, they brought up again the havdalat olat ha'of. From there, we said, what did you mean? Did you mean Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position, or the rabbi's position? And since we already had a discussion about that, which in the end we said, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position, he was disagreeing with the first opinion. It doesn't have to be completely separate to be dead. But then the Gemara said, okay, fine, let's just finally tell us what is this machloket, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis. And to understand that, it's really this debate. It starts with the debate about what the word kamishpat means, 3 different interpretations, which we really only got to 2 of them today, and that middle position really had nothing to do with the havdalah part, but it all starts with the olat ha'of is done like something. What's it done like? Either like the chatat behema or like the chatat ha'of, and within chatat ha'of we're going to have 2 different opinions about in what ways it's similar to the chatat ha'of. And with that, we finish for today, wishing everyone a Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, and we will meet back up after Shavuot.